Sometimes I wonder if I hold the unofficial world record for the most expensive piece of farm equipment-related accidental property damage. I'm talking about the kind of damage that involves a 20-ton combine harvester and a vehicle that, for all intents and purposes, was trying its very best to cosplay as a high-performance police interceptor, complete with really, really terrible decals. And if there's a story there, oh, you bet your sweet bippy there's a story. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because today, I'm going to tell you how I ended up in a standoff with an HOA president who thought his authority extended to blocking my barn with his prized, utterly ridiculous police Lamborghini, and how that situation resolved itself with a rather decisive crunch. It sounds crazy, I know, but trust me, the reality was even crazier. My name is Frank Miller, and for the better part of 60 years, my family has farmed this land. We're talking predating the state highway by a good 20 years, and certainly predating the Whispering Pines estates, the sprawling HOA development that had sprung up like aggressively manicured mushrooms on what used to be Old Man Hemlock's back 40. I'm an engineer by trade, spent 30 years designing industrial control systems, so I'm what you'd call a methodical man. Patience is a virtue I cultivated professionally, and farming, well, that teaches you a different kind of patience altogether. The farm isn't a hobby, it's a legacy, a working operation that puts food on tables, including my own. It's a place of grit and soil, of honest sweat, and the rhythmic growl of machinery, a stark contrast to the pristine, obsessively regulated world of Whispering Pines next door. The problem started, as they so often do, with a change in leadership. Bartholomew Barty Crumpton III became the HOA president. Barty was a monument to mismatched ambition and bad taste. He favored pastel golf shirts, a size too small, usually stained with something unidentifiable by lunchtime, paired with pleated khakis that had seen better decades. He wore his Bluetooth earpiece like a military decoration, though I never once saw him actually speak into it. His silver hair was meticulously brill-creamed into a helmet that defied wind and reason, and he drove a leased, base-model German luxury sedan that he probably believed imbued him with an aura of continental sophistication. From the moment he took the gavel, Barty decided that my farm, my multi-generational, legally operating agricultural zoned farm, was a personal affront to his vision of suburban perfection. His first salvos were minor, almost laughable. Nasty little notes, printed on cheap letterhead emblazoned with a clip-art pine tree, started appearing on my fence posts. Your fence, one sniffed, is not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of the adjacent community. We request immediate remediation. Remediation? It was a 100-year-old split-rail fence, weathered and strong, marking a property line that was older than Barty's entire bloodline. Another note complained about the unseemly display of agricultural implements, referring to my John Deere tractor parked, as it always was, well within my own property lines. A good 50 yards from the nearest Whispering Pines McMansion. I tried reason. I showed him the county surveyor maps, the zoning ordinances, even offered him a cup of coffee to discuss it like grown adults. He'd just squint at the documents through his smudged bifocals, a condescending little smirk playing on his lips, and say something like, "Well, Mr. Miller, ordinances can be interpreted." We at Whispering Pines prefer a more proactive approach to community harmony. Proactive, in Barty's dictionary, apparently meant being a monumental pain in the backside. He had this way of looking down his rather prominent nose at me, as if I were some sort of quaint, dirt-covered relic he was unfortunately obliged to tolerate. He consistently and fatally underestimated me. He saw a farmer. He failed to see the engineer who designed systems that could run entire factories. He saw calloused hands. He missed the mind that processed data and planned contingencies with cold, hard logic. This initial phase was annoying, like a persistent mosquito, but it was manageable. I documented everything, of course, a habit from my engineering days. Every note, every verbal exchange, time, date, witnesses if any. I figured it might come in handy. I just didn't realize how handy or how dramatically things were about to escalate with the arrival of Barty's four-wheeled folly. The true descent into farce began the day the Whispering Pines public safety vehicle made its grand debut. Barty, in his infinite wisdom, and with what I later learned was a highly contentious and barely approved HOA budget line item, had acquired a car. Not a sensible used sedan, not a practical pickup for community tasks. No, Barty had procured a bright yellow, vaguely wedge-shaped sports car. I think it was a much-abused Pontiac Fiero with an ostentatious body kit designed to mimic something Italian and unaffordable. He'd had it wrapped in white vinyl, slapped on some crooked, home-printed Whispering Pines HOA Patrol decals in a font that screamed Microsoft Word Art 1998, and topped it off with a cheap, flashing amber light bar he'd probably bought off an obscure website. This thing was Barty's chariot, his symbol of ultimate authority. He paraded it around the development like a conquering hero, the tiny engine whining heroically as he enforced parking regulations with the zeal of a Roman emperor. My neighbor, old Mrs. Henderson, who'd seen more seasons than Barty had seen good decisions, called it Barty's banana boat of buffoonery. The name stuck, at least amongst those of us on the periphery of his domain. The objective behind this automotive abomination, as far as I could tell, was twofold. First, to stroke Barty's already dangerously inflated ego. Second, to intensify his campaign of petty harassment against me and my farm. He truly believed, I think, that my farm was actively depressing property values in his utopia of beige siding and HOA-approved lawn gnomes. He wanted me gone, or at least to somehow transform my working farm into a manicured, silent, agricultural theme park. The banana boat became his primary tool of intimidation. He, often accompanied by his perpetually nervous and obsequious vice president, a weaselly little man named Giles Pinter, would cruise slowly along the road bordering my property, the amber light flashing impotently in broad daylight. They'd park it just off my land, Barty behind the wheel, sunglasses on, trying to look menacing but mostly just looking constipated. Then the citations started. Not official legal citations, mind you, but more of Barty's homemade missives, now hand-delivered by Giles, who would scuttle up to my mailbox, drop the offending paper, and scuttle back to the dubious safety of the Fiero like a frightened crab. I got cited for excessive dust generation when I was harrowing a field, a perfectly normal agricultural activity. I got cited for noise pollution when my rooster crowed at dawn, something roosters have been doing since, well, roosters. I got cited for the unpleasant aroma of livestock, despite my barns being clean and the wind rarely blowing towards Whispering Pines. Each citation came with a demand for immediate cessation and often a vague threat of further action. I continued my meticulous documentation, photos of the banana boat parked menacingly, videos of Giles's furtive deliveries, copies of every ridiculous citation, complete with my own written rebuttals referencing agricultural zoning laws and right-to-farm statutes. I sent these rebuttals via certified mail to the HOA board, return receipt requested. The receipts always came back signed by a B. Crompton. I tried attending an HOA meeting, held in their soulless community clubhouse. The moment I raised my hand to speak, Barty, gaveling like a man possessed, declared me out of order, as I wasn't technically an HOA member. Several residents, clearly intimidated by Barty's bluster, averted their eyes. A couple, however, gave me sympathetic, almost desperate looks. It was clear Barty was running the HOA like his personal kingdom, and not everyone was thrilled with his reign. One afternoon, things took a more direct turn. A truck was delivering a load of organic fertilizer. It's pungent stuff, no denying it, but vital for the soil. As the truck was backing into my service lane, the banana boat screeched, or rather squeaked, to a halt, blocking its path. Barty, puffed up like an angry toad, emerged. "This vehicle," he announced, pointing a trembling finger at the delivery truck, "is causing an unacceptable olfactory disturbance. You will instruct your purveyor to vacate the premises immediately. The truck driver, a burly fellow named Big Tony who'd seen his share of oddballs, just leaned out his window and drawled, "Mister, I got a delivery order for Miller Farms. This here is Miller Farms." "You ain't Mr. Miller. Now, are you gonna move your little Tonka toy, or am I gonna have to call my dispatcher and report an obstruction?" Barty sputtered, his face turning a shade of puce that clashed horribly with his yellow car. He blustered about HOA regulations and community standards. Big Tony just looked at his watch. Eventually, with much theatrical sighing and muttering about barbarians at the gate, Barty reluctantly moved the Fiero just enough for the truck to pass, but not before issuing me another citation for introducing noxious substances into the community. I just added it to the file. The file was getting thick. I was an engineer. I understood stress tolerances, breaking points. Barty was applying steady, increasing pressure. He clearly thought I'd crack, sell up, vanish. He didn't understand that farmers, like well-engineered structures, are designed to withstand considerable strain. He also didn't understand that even the most patient man has a limit. And Barty, bless his brill-creamed little heart, was about to help me find mine. The slow burn of his escalating harassment was starting to get under my skin, not because I was intimidated, but because it was so monumentally stupid and distracting. I had crops to tend, machinery to maintain, a farm to run. I didn't have time for Barty Crompton's suburban psychodrama. The fuse that finally ignited the powder keg was lit on a crisp Tuesday morning in early October. It was soybean harvest season, a critical time for me. The weather window was narrow, rain was forecast for the weekend, and the prices at the co-op were favorable if I could deliver within the next 48 hours. My big green combine harvester, a monstrously efficient piece of German engineering, affectionately nicknamed the Beast, was prepped and ready in the main barn, the one with the extra wide, reinforced doors specifically built to accommodate its bulk. This barn wasn't just storage, it was the operational heart of my harvest. Without easy access to it, I was dead in the water. I'd been up since before dawn, checking fluid levels, greasing zerks, mentally running through the day's plan. Coffee in hand, I walked out towards the barn, the rising sun painting the dew-kissed fields in gold and amber. And then, I saw it, parked, squarely, in front of my barn. Doors, not just close, not just encroaching, blockading. The banana boat, Barty's ridiculous yellow Fiero, was positioned perfectly to prevent the massive doors from opening more than a few inches. And standing beside it, sipping from a world's best president novelty mug, looking as smug as a cat who'd not only eaten the canary, but also framed the dog for it, was Bartholomew Crompton III himself. Giles Pinter, looking even more anemic and twitchy than usual, hovered nearby like a nervous shadow. My blood, usually a slow, steady current, began to simmer. I took a long, deliberate sip of my coffee, buying myself a moment to process the sheer, unadulterated audacity. "Barty," I said, my voice calm, level, a stark contrast to the thundercloud gathering in my chest. "Morning. That's an interesting parking spot you've chosen." Barty turned, a slow, deliberate movement, clearly designed to convey maximum condescension. He even adjusted his sunglasses, though the sun was barely over the horizon. "Miller," he acknowledged, the name dripping with disdain. "Just ensuring the tranquility of the neighborhood. Wouldn't want any disruptive agricultural activities commencing before a respectable hour." It was 7:30 a.m. Farmers in this county had been working for 2 hours already. "Barty," I repeated, still calm. "That's my barn. You're blocking my access. I have soybeans to harvest today. That car needs to move. Now." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound like gravel in a blender. "Your barn, as you call it, abuts HOA common property here." He gestured vaguely with his mug, sloshing coffee onto the Fiero's already questionable paint job. "And frankly, the noise and dust from that contraption of yours is a constant source of complaint. We're merely taking preventative measures. This was a lie. The area directly in front of my barn was indisputably my property, clearly marked on every survey, right up to the edge of the gravel access road. He knew it. I knew it. That car is on my land, Barty. It's illegally parked, and it's obstructing my lawful business operations. I'm giving you one chance to move it. My voice had lost its earlier calm. There was a new edge to it, hard as forged steel. Giles flinched visibly. Barty, however, seemed to swell with misguided confidence. He took another ostentatious sip from his mug. "Or what, Miller?" he sneered, his little eyes glittering with malice. "What are you going to do? Call your farmer friends? Write another one of your little letters? Maybe you'll try to run it over with that rusty old, what do you call it, your reaper?" He actually gestured towards the barn, towards the beast slumbering within. A flicker of an idea, dark and deeply satisfying, sparked in my mind. He'd practically dared me. He looked at me, then at the barn, then back at me, a smirk spreading across his face. He honestly thought he had me. He thought I was trapped, that I'd capitulate, that his little yellow toy car had defeated my livelihood. He saw the old farmer, the one he'd been bullying for months. He didn't see the engineer who understood leverage, force, and consequence. My internal monologue was brief and decisive. I could call Sheriff Brody. He was a good man, but he'd sigh, say it was a civil matter, tell us to work it out. That meant lawyers, injunctions, delays I couldn't afford. The soybeans wouldn't wait. The weather wouldn't wait. Barty had pushed and pushed and pushed. Now he was standing on the precipice, daring me to shove. "All right, Barty," I said, my voice suddenly devoid of all emotion. "Have it your way." I turned and walked back towards the farmhouse, not giving him another glance. I could feel his smug, triumphant gaze burning into my back. He thought he'd won. He had no idea. Inside, I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the sheriff. I went to my office, pulled out my detailed farm plot survey, the one clearly showing the property lines around the barn. I grabbed my digital camera, the one I'd been using to document Barty's campaign of idiocy. Then I walked back outside. Barty was still there, preening. Giles was fidgeting. I ignored them. Methodically, I began to document the scene. Wide shots showing the Fiero, my barn, the property markers, close-ups of the car's position, its proximity to the doors. I took shots from multiple angles, ensuring the timestamps were clearly visible. I even took a short video, narrating calmly. Tuesday, October date, approximately 7:45 a.m. This is Frank Miller. This vehicle, a yellow Pontiac Fiero, license plate, I made sure to get a clear shot of it, is illegally parked on my private property, blocking direct access to my primary agricultural barn, preventing me from commencing essential and time-sensitive harvest operations. The owner of the vehicle, Mr. Bartholomew Crompton, president of the Whispering Pines HOA, is present and has refused to move it. Barty watched this performance with a mixture of confusion and renewed arrogance. "Playing games, Miller? That won't help you." I didn't respond. I finished my documentation, a cool, professional detachment settling over me. Then I walked over to the beast's enormous access panel, unlocked it, and climbed up into the cab. The view from up there is considerable. I could see Barty's face, his smirk faltering slightly as the sheer scale of the harvester seemed to finally register. I inserted the key. The massive diesel engine of the beast coughed once, then roared to life, with a sound that shook the very ground Barty was standing on. It wasn't the asthmatic whine of his Fiero. This was the bellow of pure, unadulterated industrial power, a deep, guttural rumble that spoke of acres consumed and tons processed. From my elevated perch in the climate-controlled cab, I saw Barty take an involuntary step back, his world's best president mug rattling in his hand. Giles Pinter looked like he was about to be physically ill, his face the color of sour milk. I let the engine warm for a moment, the vibrations thrumming through my seat. I double-checked my mirrors, made a show of adjusting them, even though I knew perfectly well what was where. The silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic throb of the diesel, stretched taut. Barty, perhaps emboldened by my apparent hesitation, or maybe just unable to comprehend the reality of what was about to happen, shouted something up at me. The engine noise mostly drowned him out, but I caught the words, "Private property, vandalism, sue you blind, Miller." I just gave a small, non-committal shrug, the kind you give when you're considering something of little consequence. Then, I engaged the hydrostatic transmission. The beast lurched forward, not quickly, but with an inexorable, irresistible momentum. The 20-ton machine, designed to carve its way through dense fields of crops, began to roll. I aimed not directly at the Fiero, not yet. I maneuvered the beast just slightly, as if I were genuinely trying to squeeze past the illegally parked car. It was a charade, of course, but a necessary one. The massive header, the part designed to swallow entire swathes of soybean plants, was still folded up for transport, but even folded, it was wider than a pickup truck. Oh dear. I might have muttered to myself, ensuring my internal dashcam was recording my diligent attempt to navigate. Such a tight squeeze. If only certain individuals understood basic parking etiquette and property laws. The left side of the harvester, the massive drive wheels taller than Barty himself, inched closer to the little yellow car. I could see Barty waving his arms frantically now, his smugness entirely evaporated, replaced by a mask of dawning horror. Giles was backing away rapidly, tripping over his own feet. "I'm trying, Barty," I called down, my voice filled with mock concern. "But your vehicle is severely obstructing my path of egress for vital agricultural commerce." The critical moment arrived. There was simply no more room. The immutable laws of physics were about to have a very pointed conversation with Barty's automotive pride and joy. With a slight, almost imperceptible adjustment of the controls, a purely accidental twitch, you understand, the massively treaded front left tire of the beast made contact with the Fiero's flimsy front fender. There wasn't a dramatic crash. Not initially. It was more of a groan, a tortured sigh of yielding metal and plastic. The Fiero, designed for suburban streets, not agricultural warfare, began to buckle. The sound of tearing fiberglass, like giant fingernails on a chalkboard from hell, was followed by the sickening crunch of crumpling steel. The banana boat, Barty's symbol of petty tyranny, folded up like a cheap suit caught in a thresher. Which, in a way, it was. I didn't stop. The beast continued its slow, majestic, and utterly destructive crawl. The front tire climbed up and onto the Fiero's hood, the little car groaning in protest before submitting with a final, definitive crunch. The windshield imploded. The roof buckled. The cheap amber light bar popped off and skittered across the gravel. I drove the harvester forward just enough so that the front tire was resting squarely on what used to be the Fiero's engine compartment, the yellow bodywork now a crumpled, pathetic mess beneath tons of green and yellow steel. Then I brought the beast to a halt, idled down the engine, and set the parking brake with a decisive hiss of air. Silence, save for the ticking of the beast's cooling engine and a strange, high-pitched keening sound. I looked down. Barty Crompton III was on his knees. His world's best president mug lay shattered beside him, its ceramic shards scattered like fallen dreams. His face was a contorted mask of disbelief, rage, and utter abject defeat. The keening sound was coming from him. Giles Pinter, meanwhile, had backed up against the far wall of my equipment shed, hands clasped over his mouth, eyes wide as dinner plates. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, or perhaps a very large piece of farm machinery commit premeditated vehicular homicide. I calmly climbed down from the cab, my old work boots hitting the gravel with a satisfying crunch of their own. I walked over to the flattened remains of the Whispering Pines public safety vehicle. "Oh my goodness, Barty," I exclaimed, my voice dripping with the politest, most insincere concern I could muster. Was that your car? I am so terribly, terribly sorry." It was parked right in my barn accessway, you see, completely illegally. I must not have seen it properly over the bulk of my machine when I was trying to maneuver out. You know these big harvesters, they're not exactly nimble city cars. Such a blind spot there. Are you all right, Barty?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the automotive pancake under my tire, the pathetic, twisted remnants of his authority. Then he started to scream, incoherent noises of fury and frustration. He pointed a trembling finger at me, then at the harvester, then back at me. You, monster! You did this on purpose! I'll have you arrested! I'll sue you! I'll ruin you!" "Now, Barty," I said soothingly, "let's not jump to conclusions. It was an accident. A very unfortunate accident, caused by an illegally parked vehicle obstructing a place of business. I have photos, and video. Of your car, right here, blocking my access." Predictably, Barty's next move was to fumble for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "I'm calling the real police," he shrieked. "They'll deal with a maniac like you." "An excellent idea, Barty," I said, nodding pleasantly. "I think it's best we get the professionals involved to sort this out." I had a feeling Sheriff Brody was going to have a very interesting morning. And I had my documentation, pristine and ready. My engineering mind had planned for this contingency, even if the farmer part of me had just reacted with righteous, crushing indignation. Sheriff Brody arrived about 20 minutes later, his county cruiser kicking up a plume of dust as it rumbled down my access road. Brody was a man built like a weathered oak, solid and unflappable, with a dry wit and a deep understanding of the local dynamics. He'd seen it all, or so he probably thought until he saw the mangled remains of a yellow Fiero partially submerged under the colossal tire of my John Deere combine. He took off his Stetson, ran a hand through his thinning gray hair, and let out a low whistle. "Well, Frank," he said, his voice carefully neutral as he surveyed the scene, "looks like you've had a bit of a parking dispute." Barty, who had momentarily ceased his incoherent screeching upon the arrival of actual law enforcement, immediately launched into a fresh tirade. "Sheriff, thank heavens you're here. This vandal, Miller, he deliberately destroyed my vehicle. The official Whispering Pines HOA public safety car. He ran it over with that Leviathan." He was practically dancing with apoplectic rage, spittle flying. Giles Pinter, emboldened by the presence of a real badge, chimed in, "It's true, Sheriff. We saw the whole thing. He just drove right over it. Malicious destruction of property." Sheriff Brody listened patiently, his gaze occasionally drifting from Barty's florid face to the 20-ton harvester, then to the flattened car, and finally to me. I stood calmly, hands clasped loosely behind my back. When Barty finally paused for breath, Brody turned to me. "Frank, you want to tell me your side of this?" "Certainly, Sheriff," I said, my voice still measured. "As I was explaining to Mr. Crompton, it was a most unfortunate accident. You see, this vehicle," I gestured to the crushed Fiero, "was parked illegally on my private property, directly obstructing the main access to my barn. It's soybean harvest season, as you know, a critical and time-sensitive operation for me. I estimate the delay caused by this obstruction was already costing me significantly." I then calmly and methodically laid out my case, much like I would present findings in an engineering review. I presented the printed photos I'd taken just minutes before the accident, clearly showing the Fiero blocking my barn, with date and timestamps visible. I showed him the short video I'd narrated, pointing out my property markers. "As you can see, Sheriff," I continued, "the vehicle was well within my property line and constituted a direct impediment to my lawful business activities. I attempted to maneuver my harvester out of the barn, but due to the vehicle's improper and unsafe placement, and frankly, the rather significant blind spots on a machine of this size when dealing with low-profile obstructions, there was an regrettable collision." I then pulled out a folder. "I also have documentation, Sheriff, of ongoing harassment and attempted obstruction by Mr. Crompton and the Whispering Pines HOA, including previous instances of him using this vehicle to try and interfere with my farm operations, and numerous unfounded citations for perfectly legal agricultural practices on my own land." I handed him the folder, which contained copies of the nuisance notices, my certified mail receipts for rebuttals, photos of past encounters, and a copy of my property survey map. Barty scoffed. "Lies. All lies and fabrications. He's a menace." Sheriff Brody spent a good 10 minutes looking through my documentation, his expression growing more thoughtful and perhaps a little weary with each page. He walked around the scene, examining the Fiero, the position of the harvester, the property lines I'd pointed out. He even squatted down to look at the angle of impact. Finally, he straightened up and faced Barty. "Mr. Crompton," he said, his voice now holding a note of official firmness, "from what I can see here, your vehicle was indeed parked on Mr. Miller's private property without his permission and was obstructing access to his place of business. Mr. Miller has documented this quite thoroughly." Barty's jaw dropped. But he destroyed it. He ran it over." "That will likely be a matter for your insurance companies to sort out, Mr. Crompton," Brody said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "From a law enforcement perspective, based on the evidence presented by Mr. Miller showing prior harassment and the clear illegal obstruction here, this appears to be, at worst, an accident caused by your vehicle being parked where it shouldn't have been. Frankly, you're lucky Mr. Miller isn't pressing charges against you for trespassing and interference with commerce." He then turned his attention to the Fiero's official markings. "And Mr. Crompton," Brody added, his voice tinged with a distinct lack of amusement, "while we're on the subject, these HOA patrol markings and that light bar on a private vehicle? That's sailing pretty close to impersonating a public safety vehicle. I'd strongly advise you to discontinue that practice immediately, lest the county prosecutor take an interest." Barty sputtered, deflating like a punctured tire. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a dawning awareness that he had catastrophically overplayed his hand. Giles Pinter looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. So, you're not going to arrest him?" Barty asked, his voice now a bewildered squeak. "No, Mr. Crompton, I am not," Sheriff Brody stated. "I'd suggest you call a tow truck for whatever's left of your car. And perhaps in the future, stick to enforcing rules on your own property." Brody then tipped his hat to me. "Frank, try to keep the heavy machinery off the sports cars, if you can help it. Makes for a lot of paperwork." He even had a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "I'll do my best, Sheriff," I replied, with perfect sincerity. "No promises if they're parked in my barn doorway, though." As the tow truck, a heavy-duty one, requisitioned with some difficulty, eventually dragged away the mangled yellow corpse of the banana boat, Barty Crompton stood watching, a shrunken, defeated figure. The air of smug authority had vanished, replaced by the sour scent of failure. My soybeans were waiting. I climbed back into the beast, fired her up, and with a clear path ahead, rumbled out of the barn and into the waiting fields. The harvest had begun, only slightly delayed, but infinitely more satisfying. The aftermath of the great Fiero flattening, as it quickly became known around the county, was as swift as it was decisive for Barty Crompton. News travels fast in rural communities, especially news involving large farm machinery and spectacularly crushed pseudo-supercars. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, claimed she heard the crunch 3 fields over and immediately started baking a victory pie. The official HOA response was initially chaotic. Barty, apparently, tried to spin the narrative within Whispering Pines, painting himself as the victim of an unhinged farmer's rampage. However, my meticulous documentation, which I discreetly shared with a couple of the more reasonable and long-suffering HOA board members I'd identified from that disastrous meeting, told a very different story. The financial implications alone were a bombshell. The Fiero, as it turned out, was only insured for its actual, rather pitiful market value, not Barty's inflated sense of its importance or the cost of its terrible custom wrap and cheap light bar. The HOA was on the hook for replacing their public safety vehicle and an internal investigation, spurred by my evidence and the increasingly vocal discontent of other residents who'd had their own run-ins with Barty's tyranny, quickly revealed a pattern of financial mismanagement and overreach on his part. It wasn't just the Fiero. Barty had apparently been using HOA funds for all sorts of vanity projects and personal vendettas. The board meeting where all this came to a head was, by all accounts, legendary. I wasn't there, of course, but Sarah Jenkins, a retired accountant who lived in Whispering Pines and had always seemed quietly horrified by Barty's antics, gave me a gleeful blow-by-blow later. Apparently, when confronted with the cost of the Fiero, his documented harassment of me, a non-member he had no jurisdiction over, and a list of other grievances compiled by suddenly emboldened residents, Barty tried to bluster his way out. It didn't work. The Lamborghini incident, as some wags were now calling it, was the straw that broke the HOA's back. Bartholomew Crompton III was unceremoniously ousted as president by a near-unanimous vote of no confidence. Giles Pinter, seeing which way the wind was blowing, had already tendered his resignation as vice president via a hastily scrawled note and was rumored to be looking at real estate in another county. The financial fallout for Barty didn't end there. The HOA board, under new, more sensible leadership, explored legal options to recoup some of the losses from Barty personally, citing gross negligence and misuse of funds. I heard through the grapevine that he ended up having to pay a significant sum out of his own pocket to cover the difference on the Fiero and some other unauthorized expenditures. His leased German sedan was reportedly repossessed shortly thereafter. The most satisfying outcome for me, beyond the personal vindication, was the broader change in the community. The new HOA president, a pragmatic woman named Eleanor Vance, who actually understood property rights and neighborly relations, made it her first order of business to reach out to me. She apologized for Barty's behavior, assured me the HOA would no longer interfere with my legitimate farming operations, and even asked if there was anything the HOA could do to foster better understanding between the development and the farm. We actually had a productive conversation. We talked about things like advance notice for aerial spraying, which I rarely did anyway, designated routes for heavy equipment during peak seasons to minimize disruption on shared roads, and even the possibility of a small farm stand on my property once a week for Whispering Pines residents to buy fresh produce. It was a night and day difference. The reign of petty tyranny was over. The atmosphere along my property line relaxed from a hostile border to just a boundary. Several Whispering Pines residents, the ones who had looked so desperate at that HOA meeting, actually stopped by my farm in the following weeks. They brought Mrs. Henderson's victory pie, apple, delicious, bottles of wine, or just came to shake my hand and thank me. Turns out, Barty had been making life miserable for a lot of people with his arbitrary rules and power trips. My accident had inadvertently liberated them all. Life on Miller Farms returned to its usual rhythm of hard work, seasonal changes, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The beast continued its duties, devouring soybeans, corn, and wheat with impartial efficiency, untroubled by illegally parked yellow sports cars. I still keep the folder of documentation, just in case, but it gathers dust now, a relic of a short but memorable suburban skirmish. Sometimes, when I'm out on the harvester, high above the fields, I'll catch a glimpse of the Whispering Pines development. It looks peaceful now. And every now and then, I can't help but chuckle, remembering the astonished, horrified look on Barty Crompton's face as his little yellow symbol of ego crumpled under the weight of agricultural reality. He learned a valuable lesson that day, one that farmers have known for generations. Don't poke the bear, especially if the bear drives a 20-ton combine. So, that's the story of how I inadvertently used a piece of heavy farm machinery to solve an HOA problem in the most decisive way imaginable. It just goes to show, sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do, especially when your livelihood and your sanity are on the line. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had an HOA story that could even come close to this level of absurdity. And hey, if you're ever driving through the countryside and see a farmer looking particularly thoughtful near his equipment, maybe give him a wide berth. You never know what kind of day he's having. Thanks for tuning in.